This one took a while, with intermittent breaks to push crayons up my nose and a constant heat that kills any willingness to work, to realizing the sheer scale of this fucking story, but the wait is finally done. Thank you all for your patience, and I hope you enjoyed the script that I started writing in early July. Hey there, furries! I just want to wish my red poisoned, free American audience a happy 4th of July. How's that democracy coming along for you, losers? Yeah, I know the 4th of July is long past us, but I don't really give a shit. I'll celebrate holidays whenever I want. Happy Easter, Happy Valentine's Day, and Merry fucking Christmas, you twats. Ferdinand Magellan is a man who, even if you've never heard of him, you've seen his influence all over the world. He named the Pacific Ocean. Magellan's Pass is a thing. He is a man of great renown who lived during the golden age of Iberia, and he is the subject of our talk today, little Timmy. Because what he did changed everything. And what did he do? Well, he was the first man to cross the entire world. You can say whatever you want about the trip's goals or even the nature of the nation he did this for, but you cannot deny that this trip, what it accomplished by its sheer scale, is incredible. It's a feat so incredible, in fact, it killed the expedition's leader. Magellan was a Portuguese man born in the north of Portugal, in the city of Porto, around 1480. He was born into nobility, and his family seemed to have been governors of the city of Porto at the time. And at the age of 25, Ferdinand enlisted in the Indian Armada, leaving in 1505 and only coming back in 1513. The early 16th century in India was a time where Portugal was sort of running rampant, like a mad fucking dog, desperately craving spices, but those spices only made this matter. And he would spend 8 years in the Indian Ocean, seemingly fighting everywhere but not doing much to distinguish himself. He fought in the naval battle of Cannanore in 1506 and also in the Battle of Diu. He went on the doomed first embassy to Malacca and participated in the conquest of that city in 1511. He fell out of favor with the crown upon his return, as he was injured while fighting in Morocco and was eventually accused of trading with the Moors. Maybe truthfully. I mean, clearly he just didn't love the peacefulness of Catholicism. Instead of trading, he should have been stabbing bitches. By 1515, he lived in Lisbon, and he was thinking of an idea. Columbus is a real dick. Even the Spanish crown thought so, as his governorship of Cuba was a bloody mess. But he had an idea. We need spices, and the world is round, so we go left, and we reach India and the delicious, sexy spices. He didn't reach India. He reached America, and well, that's a bummer. There's a lot of land, and it isn't after 1945, so he couldn't nuke it out of existence. And so, unfortunately, the dream of going west to reach east died. Or did it? Sailors went south from Cuba, and souther, and further south. By this point in time, what we now call Magellan's Pass was found, or at least the beginning of it, and we had found an unfrozen route across the American continent. What once might as well have been a complete barrier of land, turns out it wasn't, and Ferdinand Magellan was looking into it, including the chance that some of the territories he visited in the service of Portugal were actually on Spain's side of the world. He was looking into this with the help of a cosmographer by the name of Rui Ferreiro. And that's the weirdest sounding profession I've ever heard. But oh well. Rui was a genius in his field. He knew all about astronomy. So by 1517, he went to Seville with Rui, where he found another big fan of his project, João de Aranda, a member of the Casa de la Contratación, and it seems that it's due to João that Ferdinand Magellan got an audience to petition the king for this project. Now, obviously, the king says yes. Give the guys a few ships and let them fuck off God knows where. What's the worst that's gonna happen? They die and 5 ships are gone? Pfft. The king's got many more of them. And another noteworthy thing is that this trip, the first circumnavigation of the world, wasn't meant to be one. In 1519, 5 ships and 237 men set sail from Seville under the command of Ferdinand Magellan. 3 years later, those men returned, horribly shaken by what they experienced, and with their old commander no longer amongst them. I want you to bear in mind, before we continue, that all I've told you thus far is essentially the backstory. It's the context. And I also left out a lot of important details. For example, during his first stay in the Indian Ocean, Ferdinand fought side by side with his friend, Francisco Serrão, who tragically found a cooler Indian king to serve. But from this point on, our primary source is going to be this. It's, yeah, you can't see this. It's going to be this. It is Antonio Pigafetta's account of the first trip around the world. So Antonio heard of Magellan's expedition, and not missing a beat, he paid out of his own pocket to join the fleet as a paying passenger, and he got on board. He quickly began writing and detailing about what happened on this voyage. Pigafetta's account, whose name is very funny by the way, is excellent, and he talks at length about the various customs of the native tribes in kingdoms that they would encounter. I'll talk about some of them every now and then, but again, this video in this series is focused entirely on the expedition. So the goal of the expedition, fucking fly, they deserve a genocide. The goal of the expedition was simple: go westwards and avoid Portugal's half of the world, and figure out if the Molucca Islands or Spice Islands discovered there or in Spain's half of the world, and then come back. There is no mention whatsoever of sailing across the entire fucking world. In fact, it's forbidden to do so. The plan was to cross the Pacific to find the Spice Islands, and then cross it again to come back, so the fleet doesn't get in the way of Portugal and they don't think that Spain is up to something sneaky. So before they left, Magellan was feeling worried about the captains in the other ships, since they were Spanish and him Portuguese. It was possible that they might seek to overturn him or take charge of the expedition themselves, because he's a stinky foreigner. So before they left, he laid out some ground rules for them to follow. Listen up, I'm in charge here, and we need to figure out how we're going to do this. I, Ferdinand Magellan, have concocted a brilliant plan. You all are going to follow behind my ship, and I'll bring a light, so at night you don't lose me. Speaking of which, I've developed a system of lights to let you all know when we're stopping, moving, and what's ahead of our fleet. Furthermore, we'll do 3 shifts per night, once in the evening, in the midst of the night, and once at dawn. Understood? Do you understand what he's saying? Nah, he speaks wrong. And finally, on the 10th of August 1519, in the morning, the Armada set sail. They fired off a salvo on their artillery and began sailing down the river Guadalquivir. They passed several villages, a place with a collapsed Roman bridge called Juan de Alfarache, and this posed a minor challenge, as there still existed 2 support beams underwater. So, for the expedition to not end 10 kilometers from its starting point, they waited for a full tide before resuming their trip. They passed through it and then arrived at Sanlúcar, which was owned by the Duke of Medina Sidonia. This is where the ocean ports of Spain was located and their real heading off point. They stayed here for some days while waiting for the rest of the captains, and it was decreed that every crew member would undertake forced confessions every single day, apparently so that no woman could sneak aboard the ships. Sorry, ladies, but this death trap of a trip is only for guys. No girls allowed here. Okay, so on the 20th of September, the crew had left Spain, and I have no idea if you can see, that's supposed to be the Canary Islands. And the crew left Spain and went southwest and landed in one of the Canary Islands, Tenerife, where they stayed for 3 days while searching for water and firewood before moving into the harbor at Montrose. There they rested for 2 more days and were told that apparently in the island not a single drop of water would rain, nor any rivers existed. But there was a giant-ass tree that sweated water. But anyways, just don't question that. On the 3rd of October, the expedition passed through Cape Verde, whatever, which is maybe somewhere there, and they followed along the coast of African Guinea, where they were hit by violent storms and winds. This was until they reached the Ecuador, which forced them to stop moving entirely. This mess lasted for approximately 60 days, and during this time, whenever they got clear skies, the crew would often see sharks swimming around the boats, which they managed to hunt, though Antonio remarks that they're not much good for eating. They sailed in the open ocean for weeks on end. Passing through the equator line, I already fucked up the expedition line. They definitely didn't go this far. Passing through the equator, maybe around here, and reaching Brazil. They reached Brazil, which the Italians call Verzino. A name like that is why I break spaghetti in two. And the expedition proceeded southwards again, towards Rio de Janeiro, while making bank off of the natives living there and gathering anything that they could find from the shore. And on the 13th of December, they made landfall in the area, soon to be an active Portuguese colony, but already claimed by Portugal. Here, Antonio talks in great detail about the lives of the natives. He talks about the cannibalism that they inflicted upon enemies that they despised. And apparently it was a custom that began because an old woman had one single son that was murdered by a hostile tribe. The person who had done the deed was later caught and brought in front of this grieving mother. And for vengeance, this woman tried to eat the man. Right then and there, he escaped from her grasp and went back home, showing all of his friends the massive goddamn bite mark on his shoulder. It's a fantastic fucking map I got here. I don't even have Greenland. It doesn't need to exist. But yeah, in order for this tribe to not get one-upped in psychological warfare, they in turn decided to start eating people as well, according to an Italian. The natives of Brazil also reportedly painted their whole bodies and walked around naked, and reportedly had so many pairs living there that they'd happily give out 8 of them in exchange for 1 mirror, apparently. The natives were reportedly kind to the expedition, and Pigafetta himself seemed to believe that they'd easily be converted. Also, because apparently they had been suffering a drought for 2 months, and when they arrived in the area, it finally started to rain again. 13 days later, they left and sailed further south, stopping at the mouth of some unnamed Sweetwater River. They met a group of natives, terrified of the ships, but apparently one massive native approached them and explained that his friends were scared, and they came on here to try and prove that these strange people in wooden floating trees meant no harm, and they, to decidedly prove that they weren't threatening or scary, sent about 100 men on shore to chase the natives down. That didn't work. They spent some time at the mouth of this river, which they called Santa Maria. Apparently, it was riddled with all kinds of precious stones, and they soon left this area again. Pigafetta doesn't say why, but he does remark that before their arrival, there was a Spanish explorer named Juan Solis, who was, well, exploring in the area with 60 men when they came upon a seemingly friendly group of natives who offered to guide them through these dangerous lands. Oh, that's mighty fine of them.
But they ate them! They ate the Spaniards!
My God, what cruel beasts! Killing Europeans and eating them? They deserve to be set on fire, I'll tell you that much. But regardless of the reasons, the expedition had to continue southwards, as it was believed that they were nearing the crossing into the Pacific Ocean. So they stopped around there, modern-day Argentina. They specifically stopped at a twin set of islands inhabited only by sea lions and penguins, all of whom so tame that the expedition easily gathered enough supplies for the entire fleet in the span of an hour. They may have stopped here, maybe in the Falklands. I'm not sure, but I'll keep the marker here and put the on it because I want to. Storms raged on. In these islands, they were hit by constant rain and lightning. The crew even reported seeing signs of God that would immediately calm these storms. True or not, they would always come back stronger than before. And here, they would spend 2 months at a natural harbor, facing these constant storms, while the now, one of their ships, which was I only know the name in Portuguese, now, Santiago, would occasionally be sent on scouting trips, presumably to find a pass across America and into the Pacific. And when they finally found a Native American who, according to Pigafetta, was fucking tall, nearly naked, and with 2 hearts tattooed on his cheeks, this native was on a beach singing and dancing when the crew sent out a single man to try and communicate with this dancing dude. Peace and love? Love and peace? Oh, yo, dude, you're a sea person. Wanna, come chat with my boss? I don't know what you're saying, man, but it looks funny. This crew member took the native to a nearby island where Magellan was at. And this is where Pigafetta got a look at her giant friend. He also had a cape made out of an animal that lived in abundance in the area, a big-ass bow, and short arrows made out of just canes. And Magellan had the big, burly, sweated man fed and showered in gifts. One such gift was a mirror, which apparently caused the native hottie to go bananas and knock out 4 of the crewmen behind him in an accident. So, with that hilarious meeting concluded, they sent the big burly bastard back to the mainland, where they found all of his friends, probably worried sick and confused at who all these boat people were. So, you get it. More dancing, pointing at the sky, more singing, even more gifts, and the natives offered some sort of white powder in return that they had in vases, which the crew accepted. But not wanting to carry it, the man made all the women carry these vases to the ships. Those sexist pigs, man, they sure got what was coming to them, huh? The civilizing Europeans do it again. Or will do it again. Pigafetta remarks that these natives do have significant medical knowledge. For example, whenever one is feeling ill, he'd grab an arrow and stick it deep into his throat to induce vomiting. And whenever they're feeling some sort of pain anywhere in their body, they would make a small incision in order to bleed in that area. The running theory is that they were told by a captive being that these pains are caused by the blood, not wanting to be in that particular section of the body. So they forced that blood out instead. 6 days later, another big burly sexy man popped up. This one they tried converting to Catholicism, and it seems to have worked. He learned how to say Jibas, dressed like a human being with rights, and was baptized with the name of Juan. And all was right with the world. Until these natives stopped showing up. The crew apparently thought that his friends had murdered him, because they're inhuman savages. But regardless, there was nothing that they could do. Until one day, 4 natives approached suspiciously. They were painted differently than usual, but they were seemingly unarmed. Convinced that these natives were a threat, one of the captains offered them so many gifts to hold that they literally couldn't hold anything else. And as a final gift before they were returned home, the captain gave these natives fucking cuffs and literally slapped it on their legs. But don't worry, the natives acquiesced to it. And next, the captain thought, man, having these male natives as prisoners is cool, but what about the women? Obviously, a struggle ensued, and it seems that most of the natives, including the women and children, managed to run away, while a crew member was hit with a poisoned arrow and died soon after. Pigafetta remarks that they burned the native village after the natives fled and buried their sole dead men. And they were in Santa Cruz, by the way. 5 whole months would go by without further conflict with the native Patagonians. But the captains were growing restless, and several high-profile figures in the expedition started planning to kill Ferdinand Magellan. These people were Juan de Cartagena, Luis de Mendoza, the treasurer, Antonio de Coca, and Gaspar de Quesada. But this plot seems to have been discovered quickly. Pigafetta does not mention why this plot began, but it's easy to see why. No one, like the Portuguese man leading a Spanish expedition. The 2 countries were rivals at this time, and everyone but Gaspar de Quesada was put to death. And why was he spared? Well, Gaspar was a personal appointee of the Spanish king, so you really shouldn't kill the king's BFF. Gaspar was forgiven, but he started plotting his revenge again, which in turn meant he was ditched in Patagonia for years, along with priests who apparently was also conspiring. And it's around the same time that the crew received news from one of their ships, the Santiago, and it weren't good ones. Possibly due to the storms, the ship had crashed into the rocks and had been totally destroyed. The crew of that ship mostly survived, and Pigafetta himself remarks that 2 men had made the dangerous journey north to alert the main core of the expedition. So Magellan moved the fleet to the site of the crash, and another 2 months were spent collecting everything useful from the wreck. Bear in mind that at this point, in this whole Patagonian region, the expedition has spent nearly 1 year, while it took less than half that time for them to reach Patagonia. Finally, they departed as they found the crossing they needed to enter the Pacific Ocean, a sweetwater river, forever hounded by storms, and now fishing for a fish, though failing to catch enough to feed everyone. Magellan would send 2 ships across and into the strait, the San Antonio and the Concepcion, while he waited at its entrance with 2 other ships that he had, the Trinidad and the Victoria. Okay. Now, I don't know if you've looked at an image of Magellan's Pass recently, but it is a fucking sailor's nightmare over there. The only ground that you see are snow-capped mountains. The rivers, so to say, are deep, so you'd have to get dangerously close to the mountains to dock. Oh, and the storms. Constant fucking storms. It was so dangerous, in fact. Most of the crew believed there was no route westwards, that Magellan was leading them all to death. And the 2 ships that he sent out saw that river continued onwards, westwards, but without even confirming it, turned around and began sailing back towards the rest of the expedition. It took 2 days for these ships to return, and Magellan and the crew already considered them lost by the time that they returned, firing off some volleys from their cannons into the air in celebration when they saw them. And together, again, they made off into the pass, except for the Concepcion, whose captain, Esteban Gomez, hated Magellan. Why? Well, according to Pigafetta, Esteban was already petitioning the emperor for his own expedition. But of course, he was denied and instead put under the thumb of an icky foreign bitch-ass Portuguese. And so it was. They just deserted the expedition, taking Magellan's cousin hostage and picking up the exiled Spanish on the way back. So now the expedition is down to 3 ships. They spent several days inside the pass, docked in a part of which they called sardines, for the amount of sardines located in that section. They sent out I think it's called a sloop. Correct me if I'm wrong. Couriers to scout the rest of the pass and finally confirm if there is a crossing into the Pacific. And yes, they sailed into the dangerous mountainous pass without knowing if it's crossable. And an extra 4 days, fucking 4 days, were spent here, braving storms in the mountains literally all at the fucking shoreline, until the maybe sloop returned with news of another sea right at the end of the channel. Not only a sea, but the sea. The crew all cried tears of joy. Finally, after spending nearly an entire year in Patagonia, in the southern tip of America, they had their route. Around this time, Magellan, realizing the Concepcion was missing but not exactly defected, left a big flag with directions on where to find the squadron. And finally, on the 28th of November, in a region where they had 3 hours of nightfall, they left the Atlantic Ocean and entered the Pacific. And the crew was what they believed to be the halfway point of their journey, but in truth was just the beginning.